Snow came early that December, earlier than anyone expected. It began falling overnight, soft and silent, blanketing everything by the time we woke up. From the moment I opened my eyes, I could feel it, the excitement in the air. Snow meant winter break was coming. Christmas presents, sledding, snowball fights, and hot cocoa. It should have been perfect. But even then, before everything started, something about that first snowfall felt different. Lily and I bolted down the stairs that morning, racing to the window. Outside, the world was sparkling, the sun glinting off the untouched snow. Dad was already up, sipping coffee and staring out at the yard with a strange look on his face. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too busy putting on my boots and jacket. "Don't forget your gloves," Mom called from the kitchen. We bundled up so fast it felt like a blur, and within minutes, we were outside. The air was so cold it made my nose sting, and my breath came out in thick white puffs. Lily and I didn't care. We dove straight into the snow, laughing as we tossed handfuls of it at each other. "Let's make a snowman," Lily said. We worked together, rolling the snow into 3 giant balls and stacking them. Lily insisted on giving him fancy stick arms, curving them so they looked like they were waving. I found some smooth river rocks for his mouth and eyes, and we stole a carrot from the fridge for his nose. By the time we were done, our snowman looked perfect. Or as perfect as 2 kids could make him. "Think he'll come alive?" Lily asked, her cheeks pink from the cold. "Only if you believe hard enough," I said, teasing her. She punched my arm, but she was smiling. We stayed outside until her fingers were numb, and then Mom called us in for hot chocolate. Everything felt normal, happy even. But then, after lunch, Lily spotted the footprints. "Ben," she said, her voice tight. "Come here." She was standing by the living room window, staring out at the yard. I joined her, pressing my forehead to the glass. At first, I didn't see what she was talking about. The snowman was still there, standing proudly in the middle of the yard. But then I noticed the tracks. They ran across the snow in long, uneven strides. Each print was enormous, at least twice the size of Dad's boot, with jagged claw marks trailing behind them. They weren't ours. Lily and I had been inside since we finished the snowman. And they definitely weren't Dad's. "Dad!" Lily yelled, backing away from the window. "Come look at this." Dad came in from the garage, wiping grease off his hands. When we pointed to the tracks, his expression darkened. He squinted at the window, his jaw tightening. "Probably just a stray dog," he said after a long pause. "That's not a dog," Lily said. Her voice was shaking, and for once, I didn't tease her for being scared. Dad knelt down, putting a hand on her shoulder. "Snow makes tracks look bigger than they are," he said. "It's nothing to worry about." But his eyes flicked back to the window, just for a second. And I saw something there. Doubt, maybe. Or fear. Mom came in a few minutes later, carrying a box of Christmas decorations. She didn't notice the tension in the room. "Let's put up the tree," she said brightly. "Come on, kids. It'll take your minds off the city track business." We spent the rest of the afternoon decorating, and by the time we were done, the house was glowing with twinkling lights, shiny ornaments, and garlands. Christmas music was playing on the radio, and the smell of Mom's cookies filled the air. For a while, it felt like everything was normal again. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was too quiet. Not the cozy kind of quiet I usually liked, but a heavy, suffocating silence that made my skin crawl. And every now and then, the wind would howl, rattling the windows. And I think I heard something else. A soft crunch, like footsteps in the snow. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just my imagination. But then I heard it again. I sat up, my heart pounding. "Lily," I whispered. "Are you awake?" She groaned. "Go to sleep, Ben." I think there's something outside," I said. That got her attention. She sat up, her blonde hair sticking out in all directions. "What are you talking about?" "Just come look." We crept to the window together, careful not to wake Mom and Dad. The glass was icy against my fingertips as I pulled back the curtain. At first, all I saw was snow. But then something moved. A shadow. It slid across the yard, long and thin and wrong. My stomach dropped. It wasn't a person, and it definitely wasn't an animal. It was tall, almost as tall as the oak tree in the corner of the yard, with limbs that were too long and thin to be natural. Its arms dangled at its sides, clawed and bony. Its legs moved stiffly, jerking with every step. It was heading for a snowman. "Ben," Lily whispered. "What is that?" "I don't know," I said. My voice came out shaky, barely louder than a breath. The creature stopped in front of the snowman. It cocked its head, studying it like it was curious or amused. Then, slowly, it raised one clawed hand and swiped at the snowman's head. The carrot nose went flying, and the rocks scattered as the head crumbled into a pile of snow. Lily let out a sharp, high-pitched scream, and the creature's head snapped up. Its glowing eyes, two burning, amber-like orbs, locked onto ours. For a moment, it didn't move. Then it opened its mouth, revealing jagged yellow teeth, and let out a sound I'll never forget. A deep, guttural growl that rumbled through the air like thunder. The door to our room flew open. Mom and Dad burst in, their faces pale with panic. "What's going on?" Dad demanded. There's something out there," I said, pointing to the window. Dad crossed the room in 2 long strides and yanked back the curtain. But by the time he looked, the yard was empty. The snowman's body lay in ruins, but the creature was gone. It was there," Lily cried. We saw it." Dad didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared out at the yard, his lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, he turned to us and said, "It's late. You kids need to get some sleep." "But," I started. "Now," he said, more firmly this time. Mom knelt down and pulled us into a hug. "You're safe," she whispered. "Nothing can get in. It's just your imagination." But when morning came, the tracks were back. This time, they led all the way to the porch. The tracks on the porch were worse than anything I'd expected. They weren't just near the steps. They were on the porch, pressed deep into the snow that had drifted up overnight. Some of the marks were smeared, as if whatever had made them lingered there, shifting its weight. The clawed toes curled toward the door, like it had been trying to figure out how to get in. "Dad!" I called, my voice trembling. He came rushing out of the kitchen, still holding his coffee mug. When he saw the prints, his face went pale. He opened the door and stepped outside, muttering under his breath about kids and pranks. but as he crouched to examine the tracks, I could tell he didn't believe his own words. He reached out, hesitating before pressing his hand into one of the prints. It dwarfed his hand completely. "Go inside, Ben," he said without looking at me. "Now." I stepped back, bumping into Lily, who had been peeking out from behind me. She looked just as scared as I felt. Dad stayed outside for a while, pacing back and forth on the porch, scanning the yard as if he expected something to jump out at him. Eventually, he came back in, his boots tracking snow onto the rug. "Whatever it is," he said, "it's not coming back. We'll stay inside for the rest of the day, just to be safe." Mom gave him a sharp look. "You think it's dangerous?" "I think it's probably nothing," he replied too quickly, his voice tight. "But no reason to take any chances." Mom didn't argue, but she kept glancing toward the window as she made breakfast. Lily and I tried to focus on our cereal, but every creak of the house made us jump. And even Dad, who normally acted like nothing scared him, kept looking out of the window, his lips pressed into a thin line. The day dragged on, and the tension in the house grew thicker. Every so often, Dad would go to the window, pulling the curtain back just a little to peek outside. I started doing it too, though I wasn't sure what I was expecting to see. Part of me hoped the tracks would just disappear, like they'd never been there at all. But they stayed, a constant reminder of the thing that had been watching us. By the time night fell, the fear in the house was almost unbearable. "Let's watch a movie," Mom suggested after dinner, her voice too bright, too cheerful. Something funny. We could all use a distraction. Lily picked Elf, one of her favorites. Normally, I would have groaned. She always picked the same movies. But tonight I didn't complain. Anything that made the house feel normal again was fine by me. We all crammed onto the couch, the TV flickering with scenes of Christmas cheer. Mom and Lily laughed at all the jokes, and Dad even cracked a smile once or twice. For a little while, I almost forgot about the tracks. Almost. But then there was a noise. It started faint, like a soft scraping sound. At first I thought it was just the wind, but as it grew louder, it became clear that it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the roof. Dad froze, his hand halfway to the popcorn bowl. Lily clutched Mom's arm, her face pale. The sound, it continued, steady and deliberate, as if something heavy was moving across the shingles. "Stay here," Dad said, his voice low. He grabbed the fireplace poker and headed for the stairs. Mom tried to stop him, but he shook his head. "Just keep the kids here," he said. "I'll check it out." He climbed the stairs slowly, the poker gripped tightly in his hands. The sound on the roof stopped as soon as he disappeared from view. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It stretched on and on, broken only by the soft hum of the TV. Dad? I called after a few minutes. No answer. Mom stood, her face tight with worry. "Stay with your sister," she said, and then she followed him. Lily and I huddled together on the couch, the movie still playing in the background. Neither of us spoke. The minutes dragged by, and the silence grew heavier with every second. I kept expecting to hear Dad's voice, or Mom's, but the house stayed quiet. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. We have to go check," I said, standing up. "No!" Lily grabbed my arm. "Mom said to stay here." "They've been gone too long," I said. What if they need help? She didn't argue, but she didn't let go of my arm either. Okay, she whispered. But we stick together. We crept upstairs, the floorboards creaking under our feet. The hallway was dark, and the door to the attic, the one that led to the crawl space under the roof, was ajar. My stomach churned as I stepped closer, half expecting something to leap out at me. Mom? Dad? I called, my voice trembling. Still, there was no answer. Lily tugged at my sleeve, her eyes wide with panic. Let's just go back downstairs. We can't leave them, I said, though my voice shook as much as hers. I reached for the attic door, my hands trembling. The ladder was down, leading up into the darkness. And the air smelled strange, cold and metallic, like blood. And then I heard it. A low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. It came from the attic, echoing in the tight space above us. Run, I whispered. Lily didn't need to be told twice. We bolted back down the stairs, our feet pounding against the wood. Behind us, something heavy thudded against the attic floor. The growl turned into a snarl, followed by the sound of claws scraping against the wood. We reached the living room and slammed the door shut behind us. Lily was crying, her breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. The growling had stopped, but I could hear something moving above us. Slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth. What do we do? Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was whatever was in the attic wasn't Mom or Dad, and it wasn't going to leave us alone. We stayed huddled in the living room for what felt like hours, too scared to move. The pacing above us stopped eventually, but the silence that followed was worse. It was the kind of silence that pressed down on your chest, making it hard to breathe. Every creak of the house felt magnified, like it was waiting to burst apart. Lily clung to me, her small hands trembling. Do you think Mom and Dad are... She couldn't finish the sentence, but I knew what she meant. The thought made my stomach twist, but I couldn't let her see that. I had to be the brave one. They're fine, I lied. We just need to figure out what to do. We should call someone, she said. The police, maybe. My heart sank. The phones are upstairs. Lily's eyes widened, and I could see the tears welling up. She wasn't just scared. She was losing hope. I had to think of something, anything to keep her calm. What about the neighbors? I said. We can run over to Mrs. Crane's house. She'll call for help. But what if that thing is out there? She whispered. I didn't have a good answer. I glanced at the window, where frost had crept across the glass in strange swirling patterns. The snow outside looked untouched, but that didn't mean it was safe. Still, staying in the house felt even more dangerous. We have to try, I said. We can't just sit here. Lily nodded reluctantly, wiping her eyes. I grabbed Dad's flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and we slipped on our boots and coats as quietly as we could. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to unlock the door. But finally, I turned the knob and eased it open. The cold hit us like a slap in the face. The air outside was still and heavy, the kind of cold that made your lungs ache. The snow crunched under our boots as we stepped onto the porch. The tracks from earlier were gone, buried under a fresh layer of snow. And for a moment, I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, the thing had left. But as we reached the bottom of the porch steps, a sound froze me in place. It was a low, guttural growl. I turned slowly, the flashlight's beam trembling in my hands. At first, I couldn't see anything. The yard looked empty, the snow pristine under the moonlight. But then, just beyond the reach of the light, I saw it. Two burning, amber-like eyes staring at us from the edge of the woods. "Run," I whispered. Lily grabbed my hand and we bolted toward the road, but the snow was deep, making every step a struggle. My lungs burned and my heart pounded in my ears, but I didn't dare to look back. I could hear it behind us, the heavy, unnatural thud of its footsteps. It wasn't running. It didn't need to. It knew we couldn't outrun it. Mrs. Crane's house was just ahead, her porch light glowing like a beacon. "Almost there," I gasped. We stumbled onto her porch, banging on the door with all our strength. "Mrs. Crane, help us!" I shouted. The light inside flickered on, and a moment later, the door creaked open. Mrs. Crane stood there, wrapped in a robe, her face a mask of confusion. What's going on?" she asked. "Something's chasing us," I said, pushing Lily aside. "We need to call the police." Mrs. Crane frowned, but she didn't argue. She led us into the living room and picked up the phone. I collapsed onto the couch, trying to catch my breath. Lily sat beside me, her face buried in her hands. Mrs. Crane dialed, but after a moment, she frowned. "The line's dead," she said. "No," I whispered. That's not possible." She glanced at the window, her frown deepening. "Stay here," she said, moving toward the curtains. "Let me see if—" "Don't!" I shouted, but it was too late. She pulled back the curtain, and the thing was there, standing just on the other side of the glass. Its face, or what passed for a face, was pressed against the window, its amber eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It grinned, revealing jagged yellow teeth that dripped with something dark and vicious. Mrs. Crane screamed. The creature moved faster than I thought possible. The window shattered as it crashed through, sending shards of glass flying. Lily and I dove to the floor, covering our heads. But Mrs. Crane didn't have time to run. The thing grabbed her with its long clawed hands, dragging her out into the snow. Her screams echoed into the night. But then they stopped abruptly. I grabbed Lily's hand, pulling her toward the back door. "We have to go!" But where?" she cried. "It will find us. Come on, we'll figure it out," I said, though I didn't believe my own words. We ran through the kitchen, out the back door, and into the woods. The trees were dense, their bare branches casting eerie shadows into the moonlight. I could hear it behind us, crashing through the underbrush, but I didn't dare to look back. "Ben," Lily sobbed, I can't." "Yes, you can," I said, dragging her along. Just keep moving." The forest seemed endless, and every step felt like a battle against the cold and the snow. My legs ached, and my lungs felt like they were on fire. But then, ahead of us, I saw something. A cabin. It was the old hunting cabin Dad had mentioned once, back when he used to take us camping. "We'll hide there," I said. We reached the cabin and shoved the door open, slamming it shut behind us. The interior was dark and freezing, but at least it was shelter. I found a rusty old lock and slid it into place. my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. "We'll be okay," I told Lily, pulling her into a hug. "It can't get in." But then we heard it. The growling, deep and resonant, coming from just outside the door. Slowly, the growl turned into a scraping sound, like claws dragging across wood. The thing was toying with us, letting us know it was still there. And then it spoke. Not words exactly, but something close. A low, guttural sound that almost formed a sentence. "Come out!" Lily screamed, burying her face in my chest. I held her tightly, my own tears streaming down my face. The door shuddered as the thing slammed against it, and I knew the lock wouldn't hold. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. And then, the door splintered. The last thing I saw were those glowing eyes, filled with hunger.